is there anything that you've done before, like, so from the book you published before, you're still writing
Mhm.
this series.
Yeah.
I've heard the quote before that all art is never finished, it's just abandoned. So do you already feel like there's some things that you kind of wish you maybe would have done a little differently as you go into the next parts of your series? Or is it still kind of too early to tell with some of that?
Uh, Absolutely. I want to change everything every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That was the hardest part for me about finally publishing and letting go.
Mm-hmm.
My first book was, it never felt done and it
Mm-hmm.
never felt good enough. And sorry. I think a really big thing too is like the longer you work on a project, you're changing so much as a creator, but also just as a person. And so the way you were approaching something or a character or a situation or even a writing style changes drastically. Like I have a good account for most authors that they have a hard time going back and reading their first works, even if it wasn't objectively bad, even if it was good. You go through so much growth that you look back and you could see things that you could change. And so for my first book, I first started drafting that in 2018. It's 2024. And there are things that I'm sure if I wrote it and published it today, it would not be the same book. And I've kind of ironically noticed this trend of authors lately who have been going back and redoing their first books and like doing a new edition for
Mm-hmm.
it, like they're cutting out chapters and rewriting and all these things. And I completely get where they're coming from. I get that desire to go back and make it better in light of what you now know
Mm-hmm.
and kind of groom it in that sense. But for me, I feel like there's no benefit in looking back. I'm not on that project anymore. And my time is better spent perfecting my current writing and my new stories and my current world. And I think it's a very dangerous loop that you can be in to just be constantly fixing. So
Mm-hmm.
one thing that really helped me out with the first book on letting it go is I got to a point where a couple of, writing friends were like, are you making the story better or are you just making it different?
Mm-hmm.
And I got to the point where like, oh, I am just making it different. I'm like rewriting the sentence 5 times and no version was right or wrong. No word choice was right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It just kept changing, or I'm going to tweak this because this could be a little tighter and a little cleaner. But and as someone who struggles with perfectionism, it's been a hard thing for me. But I think I've gotten to a place where I can finally go, this is as good as it can be at this time in my life. And I can't ask for any more than that. And I actually think, at least for me, that there's a danger of staying in a project for too long,
Mm-hmm.
because then I start losing sight of it. You start seeing like this Jekyll and Hyde version of me and like what this earlier version of me thought versus this version. And then the story will start like contradicting itself. So I think I've got to a place where it's better for me to try to draft and revise as quickly as possible. And for me, that's still pretty slow. I'm not like the fastest, but I've kind of set a limit for myself with how much I'm going to attack something, because it will get to the point where it's just muddled because I've just picked at it and picked at it. So I think it's healthy to find a place where you walk away and you're like, you acknowledge that it's not going to be perfect. It never is, but is it the best at this time? And I think that's, all you can ask for.
Yeah. I think that's why you hear this, maybe one of the pieces of writing advice where I think it's maybe the most valid of like, do not edit while you are drafting. Because
It's so hard.
it is so hard. And I remember early on getting very like, I kept going back and editing and like doing, like, as I would get ahead, I'd change something and be like, oh, I should fix that back there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just realized I was in this whole loop that I was never getting out of. And I kept going back and changing. And it's like, okay, keep going forward, even if there's things, you need to change. But like, yeah, you get in that loop and it's no good.
Yeah. It's like, what's that saying, done is better than perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Because I my initial prologue for my first book, I think I rewrote that probably 24 times.
Mm-hmm.
It got to the point where I was in this loop. I'm like, I have this character epiphany. I need to go back and fix it all now. And I make the mistake of sometimes, for a while, I would reread what I'd written the previous day when I was drafting. And I realized it took me like a year and a half to realize that was just sabotaging me, because it was turning me into this editor mindset, critiquing my words from the get-go. And then I would come back into drafting. I'm like, I'm paralyzed. I don't know, this isn't perfect. If it's not coming out perfect the first time, maybe I just need to go back and keep tweaking other things and it will come to me. And it's a very dangerous place, and I struggle with it to this day. It's getting a little easier to manage, but turning off that editor hat is huge.
Mm-hmm.